Here's some coups. Venezuela has been in the news lately. No, not as a good faith argument of why we shouldn't have universal health care, but because it's a country deep in crisis, the lives of millions hanging in the balance. Luckily, our country is being led by the most highly qualified people who are going to carefully approach this situation with the surgical precision of a—
If you choose this path, you will find no safe harbor, no easy exit, and no way out. You will lose everything.
Gorgeous, beautiful man. I love you. Anywho, the US is currently backing Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela, despite the fact that the Venezuelan people have not actually voted for him. This is what's known in the business world as a coup, or well, it's spreading democracy. Now, it's true that Maduro's legitimacy is questionable, given that he barred specific opponents from running the election, jailed some people, expelled some from the country, which is, it's not exactly democratic. But what's democratic these days? Not barring specific people from running for election? Not jailing or expelling some of those people? Oh, it is? Oh. It's interesting, though, because the US isn't necessarily reacting to the election, or lack thereof, as Trump asked about invading Venezuela, for reasons we'll get into in a bit, 2 years ago. His administration met with the rebel officers to plan the coup as early as 2017, because the main justification for the coup actually seems to be the terrible economic situation Venezuela is in, which Trump and other critics label as failed socialism, a very hip boogeyman these days. So it's time for our new segment. Let's take a look at the thing I just mentioned. Now, there are definitely several bad decisions and actions on Maduro's part that have led to the current crisis. And to be clear, Maduro is a piece of shit, but there are countless murderous piece of shit dictators around the world, many of whom our president praises. But he's focused on this one. So, economics. First of all, their economy depends almost entirely on the export of crude oil, which, as you can imagine, can be pretty risky. When crude oil prices went up in the 2000s under Chavez, the economy was doing quite well. But then in 2014, the oil prices crashed, and so did their almost entirely oil-dependent economy. Had Chavez saved some of the money from the boom era, the blow of the oil crash may have been softened. Another factor in the crisis is that the government-controlled exchange rate of the Venezuelan bolivar can't compete with the exchange rates of the black market. Under Chavez and his successor, Maduro, the government has overvalued the bolivar. This allows for businesses to sell excess bolivars to the black market for profit, which leads to further inflation and devaluation of the bolivar. So, this might sound a bit confusing, but here's how it works in practice, according to the person who wrote the words I am reading. A Venezuelan business, or even a government official, can request to exchange bolivars for US dollars in order to buy an American export. Say, for instance, National Treasure Alec Baldwin. Truly a comedic genius. Who better to play an abusive old rich man than etc. and so forth. Anyways, in 2016, this business, Amazing and Hilarious Impressions LLC, wants to pay $500,000 US to buy Alec Baldwin. That means, with a government-set exchange rate of $1 to 10 bolivars, it would cost them 5 million bolivars. But the black market exchange rate was about 900 bolivars to $1 in 2016. So, Amazing and Hilarious Impressions LLC could tell the government they're going to buy the expensive Alec Baldwin and take the $500,000. But since the government doesn't monitor all trades of Baldwins, AHI can surreptitiously buy a lesser Baldwin, say Todd Baldwin, for less than what they had claimed they'd need, like $100,000. They can then sell the extra $400,000 on the black market for 360 million bolivars, making a 355 million bolivar profit. When a bunch of businesses make dirty Baldwin's trades, then you have a situation in which the bolivar becomes increasingly inflated. Curse you, Alec Baldwin! Your dimples belie your dirty deeds. Also, in a terrible decision by Maduro, the government increased oil subsidies and started printing more money, driving inflation even further. Coupled with the low value of bolivars in the black market, people could buy gas for dirt cheap. Literally, in August of 2018, you could buy $1 worth of gas to fill a medium-sized car hundreds of times. And the cheapest dirt I can find on Amazon is Green Book for $14.99. Boom! Roasted. Green Book, my enemy. So, multiple bad decisions led to Venezuela's economy going into free fall. And I don't know if you noticed a pattern with these economic policies. They're not inherently socialist. It's a combination of an oil-dependent boom-bust economy and bad decisions by the government, a multifactorial situation that is unique to Venezuela. It's complex, but ultimately explainable. But, counter-argument? Convincing. So, it's true that the Venezuelan government under Chavez and Maduro played a large role in the economic crash, but what role does US policy have to play in the current... Just stop for a second. So, while Venezuela's economy was already crippled by Maduro's gross mishandling of the situation, the US sanctions are turning Venezuela's Great Depression into a deadly crisis. Economist Mark Weisbrod of the Center for Economic and Policy Research estimates that the 2017 financial embargo imposed by the US cost Venezuela $6 billion, which is a lot of dollars, or as Jeff Bezos calls it, ass-wiping money. But yes, that is devastating to Venezuela's economy. So if sanctions are making a terrible situation even more catastrophically terrible, why would the US, land of the free, home of the brave, the Santa of democracy and freedom and... Anyway, isn't the US trying our best? What about all that aid we're trying to send to them that Maduro is cruelly refusing? What kind of monster would oppose aid to Venezuela, like the ghouls in the Red Cross? That's right, the International Committee of the Red Cross has refused to collaborate with the US in sending aid. The director of the Red Cross's global operations saying, "We are not kind of an implementing agency for any donor, specifically not to implement things that have a political tone." The UN has also condemned US aid, a spokesman saying, "Humanitarian action needs to be independent of political, military, or other objectives." Interesting theory. Now, why would the Red Cross and the UN assume that aid is just a political ploy?
It'll make a big difference to the United States economically if we could have American oil companies really invest in and produce the oil capabilities in Venezuela.
So we're just saying the quiet stuff out loud? No? I get to say I'm wearing no pants and have 5 water bottles full of urine under the table? Cool! I'm wearing no pants and have 5 water bottles full of urine under the table. Whose urine? We may never know. But what might not be so cool is that in addition to us blatantly saying we want their oil, there's another subtle hint that our humanitarian aid may be a ploy, and that's because Trump has hired Elliott Abrams as his special envoy to Venezuela. Now, before we get to Abrams, I would be remiss in my news dudery if I didn't point out that in addition to Trump and his administration currently talking about how great some war oil would be, there are also several videos from Trump's old, since-deleted vlog in which he suggests going into Libya on a humanitarian basis, and then as payment for the humanitarian help, demanding half of their oil. Now, I've brought this up before, and I will continue to bring it up, because the President of the United States is on camera suggesting helping a country under the guise of humanitarian aid in order to get their oil. Also, while we're here, let's play a silly part from that.
They would have absolutely said, okay, 100%. In fact, they would have said, how about 75%?
See? They would have given us anything. 100%? Or let's take it further. They wouldn't have just given us 100%. They would have offered us 75%. President deals. Gorgeous. Anyway, speaking of humanitarian aid, Elliott Abrams, the new special envoy to Venezuela, and someone who historians might refer to as a giant sack of penises or vaginas, or, whichever one he would like the least. Well, in 1986, Abrams authorized the shipment of weapons to a group of violent right-wing Nicaraguan rebels, the Contras. You may find the word familiar because they're the titular Contras of Iran-Contra fame. Now, that may sound bad enough, but it gets worse. How did Elliott Abrams plan to smuggle these weapons to the Contras? Through a humanitarian aid flight, of course. That's right, he had the US illicitly sneak weapons onto a humanitarian aid flight. Sort of like when you don't tell your kid there's broccoli in his scrambled eggs, but instead of broccoli, they're guns that shoot deadly bullets. And now, Mr. Wily disguised guns as aide Coyote is our special envoy to Venezuela. So maybe it's understandable that Maduro, the Red Cross, and even the UN are a little wary of the US's alleged attempts at humanitarian aid. So apparently, our noble intentions may actually be bullshit, which is super weird for America. But what's the harm in propping up a little coup? You know, maybe Trump is a bad man and all his hired lackeys are cartoonish thugs, but maybe the road to heaven is paved with bad intentions. Unfortunately, the reason we don't just stage a coup every time we dislike a leader is its unfortunate tendency to become a blood-soaked civil war. South America alone has a long history of US-backed coups that have led to civil wars and authoritarianism. In 1954, the US backed a right-wing coup d'etat in Guatemala, leading to an authoritarian government, an almost 40-year civil war, and over 200,000 deaths. In 1979, the right-wing US-backed coup in El Salvador installed a military-led government which killed protesters, eventually erupting into a full-blown civil war lasting 12 years, with the new US-backed government and death squads responsible for 85% of civilian murders. At least 75,000 people were killed, though the real death toll is unknown and estimated to be higher. And I don't know why I'm saying it like this. I do realize this is pretty grisly, so here's a photo of a puppy who was killed during a US-backed coup. The point is, the US-backed coups in South America don't have a great track record. So, what are our alternatives? Honestly, this is a really complicated situation, and it's hard to give a magical solution that will solve Venezuela's problems. Or, do we have a clip of a magical solution that will solve all of Venezuela's problems? And it better not be Donald Trump dry humping the flag. God. Well, okay, so no, there's no singular magical solution, but there are some places to start, like taking Mexico's advice to foster dialogue between Maduro and the opposition party. There's also calls for new elections. Potentially a UN-observed election could avert a civil war. Although Maduro, whose elected victory was less than democratic, is resistant to the idea. But still, trying diplomatic measures is better than actively making the situation worse and potentially far deadlier, something the US is historically pretty good at. Maybe if the US could control its impulsive, destructive passions to literally say out loud you want the oil, the world would be better. Oh, okay. Can we at least use the real audio for this? Made it worse. The real audio made it worse. Help, I'm stuck in your computer, and the only way out is for you to like and subscribe and leave a comment. And check out our patreon.com/some-more-news and our podcast, Even More News. Or I'll die in here!